Hello, my name is Trilby, and I'll be guiding you through a series of core classes together. And before we get started, I just want to take time to really set the conditions that you feel safe and comfortable taking on these various shapes. Some might be a little bit unfamiliar to you, so giving you lots of variations and just education around how we can feel really held and connected in our bodies as we move through these dynamic sequences. So to start, one thing that I always like to draw people's attention to is the breath. Day to day, when we're at our computer doing tasks, we're breathing about 30% up in our chest. So when we're working the core, we want to send that breath deep into the base of the lungs, and that's going to really stimulate that diaphragmatic breathing, and that's going to help pull out the pelvic floor, which we hear a lot of talk about when we're moving safely through core exercises. So as long as you're feeling that full deep breath, slow inhales, slow exhales, it can be through the nose or out the mouth, whatever's most comfortable, that is going to ensure you're activating your abdominals in a really safe and good way. One thing I like to think about is, and I inhale, expanding, and then exhale, drawing everything in, this wrapping sensation, almost like your navel's coiling in towards your spine. One of the benefits of breathing fully and really feeling the breath travel deep into the diaphragm is that we're able to engage all of the abdominals in a really safe way. It also turns on our parasympathetic state, or our rest and digest state, which allows us to feel more relaxed, the opposite of being in fight or flight. So there's lots of benefits beyond feeling connected to your core. I also want to just go through some cues that you'll hear me say quite often and really explain the why behind them. Coming onto the back, you can just take a bend in the knees here or just watch what I'm doing here. So often we'll cue to have the hands behind the head into a cradling shape. And here, sometimes when we curl, it's all coming from the neck. So notice here, I'm actually not engaging my abdominals at all. I'm just craning my neck. So instead, try to keep the chest open and think about you've got a string attached to your navel up towards the spine and you're lifting up. So you're keeping the heart open, the chest open the whole time. So that might mean your curl is a little bit smaller, and that's totally fine. We want to feel all of the engagement right around the navel, like you're building a little fire behind there. And similarly, if that's feeling like all you can do is a crunch and you're not able to feel that activation, then I would just keep your head down and just move the lower body in whatever sequences that we're doing. Sometimes it's a march. Sometimes we'll be moving from tabletop with extensions or toe taps. So you'll feel the effort even just keeping your head down. Another thing that comes up a lot in core is this idea of imprint versus neutral spine. And how I would describe that to you in the most simple way is neutral means that you're aware of the natural curves of your spine. Some of us will have a little gap there, some of us won't. But just thinking about noticing those different points of contact and landing in a, again, neutral or natural shape. Imprint is where we take a little tuck of the tailbone. It's very subtle, and you feel like you're melting the low back or sacrum into the ground. So if there was space there to start, you're getting rid of it and finding that little tuck of the tailbone. Or you can think of buttoning the low back into the ground, and we want to maintain that. That's especially if we have our legs up in tabletop or anywhere where the toes are off of the ground. Another thing I like to think about with the ribs, and we'll talk about this when we come up to kneeling as well, is having the ribs open versus closed. So open means that I'm fanning and I'm stretching out the intercostals, all those muscles that line the ribs, whereas closed is this knitting action, this closing, wrapping them in, kind of like you're tugging everything and cinching the waist in a little bit. So you can even play around with that feeling of what it feels like to splay the ribs versus containing them. When we're mobilizing, it's nice to splay the ribs so you can really open up the fascia, but ideally when we're doing any kind of curl or twisting, we're honing in and gathering the ribs in towards the spine. And that takes me to our next little sequence. Whenever we're doing upper body or back body, there's a real tendency for us to splay those ribs. So you can notice here when I take my arms out, say I'm taking a pulse, if I'm doing this, I'm actually not really activating my back body at all. It feels nice, but I'm not really getting into those deep muscles in between the shoulder blades versus hugging those ribs in, feeling those shoulder blades connect and squeeze, and the front body is like stoic. There's nothing going on there other than a tug of the navel to spine. So another thing to think about is when we're moving from tabletop or if we're on hands and knees, Often when we're getting into the lower body, we forget to engage the upper body, meaning the core. So notice the difference when I'm dumping and sinking down here. I'm not using my abdominals at all. The ribs are quite flared here. And then if I get into the legs in any capacity, I'm kind of feeling my low back work as opposed to the front body, which is not the goal here. So instead, how we can rectify that is press the palms into the earth. Think about rounding the upper back like you're cracking open the back shell of your body, opening up the shoulder blades. Think about coiling the navel up towards the spine, and again, that closing of the ribs. And then from here, I have a nice stable foundation where the abdominals are doing about 50% of the work, and they're supporting me in this lower body exercise. And it just feels a lot better. If you find yourself starting to go down, then you're welcome to take a pause, kind of rinse it out, and then come back in again. So always thinking about that rounding of the upper back. And I also just wanted to go through a few ways you can make your practice a little bit more comfortable. So for some of us, being on our wrists is not comfortable for a variety of reasons. So you can do a few things here. You can take your mat, roll it up a couple of times, and make a little ledge. That's a nice thing to do. Or if that's not an option, coming down to your forearms, so just stacking the shoulder over top of the wrist, spreading the palm, making an 11 shape. That's a nice one. You can also interlace the fingers. And then a different version, which I quite like, which I find really gets into the abdominals as well, is to take one arm parallel to the top of the mat, the other hand down to the ground, lifting the elbow high. You can also tent the fingers. And then you're working the leg of the hand that's off of the mat. So we'd be going into the right leg here. So lots of options if the wrists are not working for you for whatever reason. And then the same thing, if you're on your back doing any kind of supine work, say we're doing curls, you can keep the head down the whole time and just move the legs. Another version that's quite nice, especially if you're pregnant, is to come up onto your forearms, find a wideness across the collarbones, and then you can do everything with us just from this shape right here. So again, lots of options you can play around with. And then every time you revisit these classes, you might want to try something new, see what lands, and as you repeat them, it'll strengthen and show up in your body, feeling a little bit more held, and then you can start to venture into different shapes. And last thing I'll say is really noticing when you're in the effort and in the work. Sometimes we start to hold our breath because we're concentrating and we're focusing on, right foot, left foot, what's going on, twisting, there's things happening. Try to always come back to that grounding breath, and that will almost always bring you into alignment and make sure that you're feeling nice and connected to your core. So hopefully now you feel prepared and held as you enter into these different classes and sequences. You can always refer to these tools and techniques before you start just to really make sure they land in your body. And I hope you enjoy moving with me.